Hello and welcome to the table, friends. A lot of us Dungeons & Dragons fans are still riding on the hype that is Baldurs Gate 3, but I also want to bring attention to another D&D type game that's going to lean more into the action-oriented type of gameplay. Dragon's Dogma 2 is going to be one of the most anticipated RPGs of this year, both with its Dark Souls-esque like combat and also with the party mechanics of D&D, and also a sprinkle of Shadow of the Colossus combat too. We're going to react and break down the latest gameplay showcase featured by IGN. And yes, I know some of you in the comments may not be the biggest fans of IGN, but my goal is to expand upon everything that they are showcased and also to go into more detail. Now, because I'm anticipating my analysis to be on the lengthy side, especially because I will be referencing things from the previous game, which, by the way, I did play an insane amount of with different types of character builds, I will be leaving specific timestamps in the description. But also I want to hear your thoughts on the gameplay for Dragon's Dogma 2, as well as features that you would personally like to see, especially if you think that I may have skimmed over one part or another. Without further delay, let's get into this breakdown.
I thought it would be a simple side quest. The owner of an apothecary enlisted my help to find his lost grandson who had been taken by wolves. As I followed the trail, I heard a screeching noise from up above. All of a sudden, I'm in a battle for my life against a griffin. It's a monster that's far too strong for my party to handle, but we fight and claw and hold our ground until finally we get it to retreat. I breathe a sigh of relief, then set up at the nearby camp and sleep till nightfall. That sleep is then interrupted by the same griffin back for revenge. That fight.
So right off the bat, I do want to say that I like the dynamic world that's showcased in the fact that there is going to be consequences. If you don't kill your monster, it's probably going to come back to haunt you.
Somehow boils over into another battle with a wight who proceeds to beat me within an inch of my life before I finally take him out, just as the sun rises after an epic 20-minute battle.
I'm not sure what.
Interesting choice to be using a warrior class against a wight or any kind of enemy spellcaster. Personally, for me, I'd use a sorceress and using silence to essentially negate their spells.
It was just a series of events that cascaded into one of the most unforgettable encounters I've ever had in an open world action RPG. And it was just one of the incredible encounters that I experienced during the 10 hours that I spent adventuring through Dragon's Dogma 2's fantastic open world. While I didn't get to start from the very beginning, I did get to begin with the creation of my own pawn. Pawns, for those unfamiliar with the first Dragon's Dogma, are AI-controlled companions that gain gear, skills, and experience from your game, and then take all of that with them online where they can be hired by other players to be companions in their own games. I'm not going to spend too much time on either pawns or character creation, especially because we've already made those videos, but what I will say is that pawns are integral to one of my big takeaways, which is that exploration and discovery in Dragon's Dogma 2 feels much more natural than ever before. First and foremost, there are no more quest boards.
So one thing I do want to break down is the fact that you can have your own personal customized pawn that you deck out, you basically create any way that you want, but at the same time, the other two party members are going to be pawns from other players. So unfortunately, there is a limitation on the actual customization from the first game, but I'm curious on whether the developers will actually allow you to fully customize a full party of pawns, or are they going to bring the limitation back where you only have your own custom pawn and you can fill the other two slots with other players' pawns that they tailor to themselves. There's some good and bad to that, in my personal opinion. Good in the fact that it allows and encourages other players to essentially trade pawns, and also maybe even building a community and having people communicate with each other on what types of pawns people want to see or to trade off with. But also the bad part in terms of limiting the customization potential.
There are no markers that appear above people's heads letting you know who's got a quest, and any sort of symbols placed on your map to let you know of points of interest are kept to a minimum. As such, you'll really rely on your pawns and NPCs to guide you through Dragon's Dogma 2's world. NPCs will, more often than not, be the ones to approach you with opportunities for side quests as opposed to it being the other way around.
Say, you wouldn't happen to have seen a pretty stone?
You there! Did you see an urchin in a cap, right?
Pawns will also point out objects of interest,
Just yonder looks to be a good spot for harvesting ingredients.
boulders that can be destroyed to find a path that leads to treasure,
If you need that destroyed, I'm your pawn. Shall I assist?
or if they already have knowledge of a quest
I'm already
from their owner's
digging into
game,
the voices.
They will straight up lead you to those quests if you give them the go-ahead.
Some of them are
All this
stereotypical
leads to a
medieval
style of
voices, though.
Exploration and adventuring that feels very organic and appropriately rewarding, very much in the same way that Elden Ring and the two most recent Zelda games do. As alluded to in the intro to this preview, you also never really know what to expect once you set out to pursue a quest lead. The very act of exploring beyond the safety of the city's walls is unpredictable.
Okay, so I will
dangerous,
admit
and
those
enticing,
types of
which is
enemies,
why it's so
I
exciting.
believe they're called ogres. They're actually worse than the giants in my opinion.
Over the
Just
course of
because
my 10
their
hours,
speed
I got to play with a
actually
total
like
of 5
will literally
vocations.
kill you.
Fighter,
It's better
mage,
in my opinion to fight
warrior,
against slow
sorcerer,
giant enemies with tons of
and
health
trickster,
than the
which you
more
can
nimble
watch a whole
enemies.
other video all about. Unlike the first game, which had you unlocking advanced vocations simply by leveling up the base ones, the 2 advanced vocations were actually unlocked via a quest. After visiting the Vocation Guild, I was given a quest to retrieve a greatsword and an archstaff, and after doing so, I unlocked both the warrior and sorcerer vocations. I don't know if all of them will be unlocked this way, and I didn't get a chance to unlock any of the hybrid ones, like Mystic Spearhand or Magic Archer, but I definitely
So I want to pause and rewind back to all of those vocations. So the thing with vocations in Dragon's Dogma is those are essentially your classes or jobs, and besides being able to pick the stereotypical fighter, rogue, mage / caster, the thing is when you level up in a vocation, specific stats will level up with you. So sometimes there is this whole meta game within the first Dragon's Dogma community where some people would say level up, not just in terms of like a general level up and XP, but level up X amount of times as a fighter in order to boost up your attack damage, or level up 10 times as a warrior to boost your health and tanking potential. So I'm really looking forward to the game devs expanding hopefully more on which specific vocations give the max amount of stats and whatnot. I know it's definitely something on the lines of like Pokemon leveling in terms of EV and IV training and all that. Like you want specific stats for a specific character build, and that's probably what I want to focus on with my channel when we cover more of this game.
warrior and sorcerer vocations. I don't know if all of them will be unlocked this way, and I didn't get a chance to unlock any of the hybrid ones, like Mystic Spearhand.
I do
or
love
Magic
the
Archer,
hybrid
but I
classes though.
definitely like the
My
idea of
only
not
gripe
having to
is
grind
that
vocations in order to unlock
if you want
others.
to play
My
as the
personal
hybrid
favorite of
classes,
the vocations
sometimes
I got
it's
to
in
try
your
was
best
by
interest
far
to
the
level
warrior,
up
who
as
maintains the
the
fantasy
base
of being the
classes
great
first
sword-wielding
in order to
badass
buff
that brings
those
giant
your
beasts to
stats
their
from
knees
them,
with just
and then
one charged strike,
later
but
on
also adds a few more
finalize
tricks
with
to the
your
repertoire.
hybrid class, if that
Director
makes
Hideaki
sense.
Itsuno heard feedback that the warrior didn't feel like a super viable vocation in the first game, and thus worked hard to give them some new elements to bring out their strengths.
Yeah,
For
warrior
starters,
did
we've
struggle
jacked
in
up
my
the warrior's
personal
offense
opinion.
and destructive power, to the
In
point
terms
where
of
it's
movesets.
unfair. In exchange, its abilities take a little longer to execute. This makes the vocation somewhat difficult to use, but that's where the tackle comes into play. If you're attacked, you can use the tackle to cause an enemy to be stunned instead of being stunned yourself, making it easier to get into the vocation. The tackle he's
Okay, so
referring
that
to is
provides
new
a little bit of
ability called
survivability.
Barge that allows the warrior to execute a quick shoulder bash, even while they're charging an attack, to interrupt and potentially stun any enemy that's trying to stuff their attack. The vocation, after all, is built around being able to charge up massively powerful attacks that deal humongous damage, so this small change goes a long way in making it a little easier to get those big shots off. My favorite new addition for the warrior, though, is a passive skill that allows you to swing regular attacks much more quickly if you're able to precisely time your next button press with when the attack actually lands. This gives
Okay, so
nice
it's a
rhythm
little
to the
bit of
warrior's
like a
combat
rhythm
and
game
allows the
there.
skilled player to
I do
compensate
like
for the
how it
typical
provides a
weakness of
little
having a
some
very slow
rewards for
attack,
you.
while still making those very slow and powerful attacks still feel like they have their own place in the warrior's skill set. Also, if you're like me and enjoy the feeling of leaping off cliffs and slamming your weapon down on a monster's head, this is the vocation for you.
Okay, I'll admit that was pretty satisfying.
Vocation to see any of the really big, crazy spells that they're so beloved for, but what I really enjoyed about the sorcerer was the addition of a unique skill called Galvanize. This allows you to go into a stance that recovers your stamina extremely quickly, which is especially useful for the sorcerer due to the fact that their spells take so long to cast. To shorten those spells...
Fun fact too, for newer Dragon's Dogma players, your magic isn't reliant on magicka. Everything is reliant on stamina, from the actual attacks and movesets to magic itself. So it does simplify it a little bit, but also it may... I do remember in the previous game, there was this whole meta of leveling up as either Strider or one of the other rogue classes to boost your stamina in order to later on be able to cast more spells as a mage. It was a little bit of a weird leveling system, but people from the previous game, if you remember more specifics, do let me know in the comments below.
Dragon's Dogma 2's open world is enormous, reported to be roughly 4 times the size of the already huge map in the first game. And I don't doubt that claim in my experience of checking out the map and wandering through just a small portion of it. It's big, but it's also dense, with exciting encounters both on and off the beaten path that were paced nicely so I wasn't constantly slowed down by back-to-back battles, but I also never went too long without having something to engage with. One thing that was important to Itsuno and the team at Capcom was making sure that the players really felt the distance that they were traveling as they explored. To that end, fast travel is very limited, like in the first game. You can only travel between...
So, one criticism I already have from the first game as well, when it came to the open world feeling, one thing I hope that they provide in the second game is a change of different enemies, or that enemies don't constantly spawn in the exact same location. I do like the idea of having a populated world, but then also a populated world where enemies will appear in random spots, then just spawn locations. Sure, there's a positive of having areas to farm and level up, but also in terms of immersion and then also replayability, plus also you don't want your players to get bored. That's just my personal opinion though. Let me know if you all in the comments would rather have a more predictable type of world where you know which enemies are going to spawn where.
Discovered port crystals, and every time you do, you must expend a fairy stone, which are highly valuable items that don't come cheap and aren't easily found.
Shall we make use of it?
Another option you have for getting around is using an ox cart, which is relatively cheap, but they are limited in the fact that you can't choose where you travel. The main one that I found only went from the capital city of Vernworth to the checkpoint town, which was far to the west. You also have to consider that ox carts are not a completely safe way to travel, as they often will be ambushed
Okay, I do
by
like
all
that
manners
type of
beasts.
immersion.
Of course,
I think it's kind of taking from Skyrim, but then actually expanding upon it and making it feel like you have to wait and potentially get attacked while in the cart.
You'd be able to heal your entire life bar by using health restorative items, and recoverable gray health with spells. In Dragon's Dogma 2, however, every hit diminishes a portion of your max health, and the only ways to restore it are either by finding a campfire to rest at, or returning to an inn and resting for the night. Fortunately, if you rest at a campfire, you can also cook some meat and get some much needed buffs, in addition to restoring all of your life. But there's a risk involved with resting at a campfire as well. The flames may attract monsters to your...
Okay, so I do like that type of dynamic as well. Hang on one sec, guys. So here's the thing too, when it comes to the travel mechanic, let's rewind back a little bit.
In Dragon's Dogma 2, however, every hit diminishes a portion of your max health, and the only...
So that's actually my concern there. It kind of feels like they're taking that from Dark Souls 2, like when you die in that game, you actually lose a portion of your max health, and the more times you die, the more your max health diminishes, and it's over small increments too. So I'm just curious if all of you would like this type of mechanic in terms of not just punishing the players, but then also making the game tell you like, hey, be more careful or be more alert and be more strategic. I'm in a mixed feeling about that. I like the challenge, but also I don't. I'm wondering if maybe we should have the option to turn it off.
Only ways to restore it are either by finding a campfire to rest at or returning to an inn and resting for the night. Fortunately, if you rest at a campfire, you can also cook some meat and get some much needed buffs in addition to restoring all of your life. But there's a risk involved with resting at a campfire as well. The flames may attract monsters to your campsite, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this preview, you could actually wake up to an angry griffin coming back to finish what it started.
I love that ambush mechanic, and also, again, the whole dynamic world.
In Dragon's Dogma 2 has some combination of a cost and a risk tied to it. Fairy stones are risk-free travel, but they come at a very steep price. Ox carts are a low cost but moderately risky.
Yeah, that's essentially their version of fast travel, but also I will admit I like the idea of not having to over-rely on fast travel. And then also immersive-wise, my immersion.
Fighting the giant tanky ogre, or risk it all on trying to bring it down for both the experience and rare material reward, whether you should keep on the less dangerous beaten path or take a detour into the unknown.
I'm going to go on a slight rant here for a second, but this has something to do with the first game, plus also I feel like some of you might find this information useful.
Trying to bring it down for both the
like I was saying earlier, I am not the biggest fan of fighting those ogre-like things, and they are smaller and have less health than, let's say, a Cyclops or any like more giant, slower enemies, but at the same time, it's their speed and agility that will kill you. So here's the thing too, if you play as a female character, those ogres will actually target and be more aggressive towards you. It's like this whole thing where they're like apes and they get overexcited when seeing women characters. But essentially, it's not a way for the game to punish you. I think it's just maybe the devs trying to add some personality or specific character traits to the ogres. But these were, genuinely speaking, one of the most annoying enemies to fight.
Material reward, whether you should keep on the less dangerous beaten path or take a detour into the unknown. In the 10 hours that I played, these were very compelling decisions to have to make. But the real test will be whether those decisions remain compelling or turn exhausting in hour 20 or 30 when the map has expanded dramatically and you still have quests remaining to complete in a town that you're super far away from. Hypotheticals aside though, I love just about every moment that I spent playing Dragon's Dogma 2 during this preview window. It doubles down on everything that I loved from the first game, makes some smart improvements to the way quests are handled and how you explore its giant world, and the little taste that I got of the Vocations is a tantalizing reminder of why Dragon's Dogma is one of the best in the genre when it comes to delivering on the various power fantasies tied to the classic RPG archetypes. Even after all I played, I still feel like I just scratched the surface on what Capcom has in store for players when Dragon's Dogma 2 releases on March 22nd.
All right, so there's some things that I really want to point out, but in general, I'm really excited, and also I'm pleased with what I've seen so far. So some things I'm most excited about are the dynamic open world, and hopefully some changing environments too, with enemies attacking and also taking advantage of you letting your guard down. Some things that I'm not so keen on are your max health getting depleted each time in combat or when you actually lose health. I think that's slightly a little bit too punishing. I like the variety when it comes to the vocations and classes, and also I like how the devs seem to listen to the community on some of the weaknesses and faults from the previous game in improving the vocations and classes for this next one too. As a side note, I know I was a bit harsh on the warrior vocation, but also the fact that there's going to be new different types of movesets and also things to kind of compensate the warrior for their lack of defense compared to the fighter, which does get a shield. All of these changes and buffs, and really any vocation in this game, is viable for players depending on how you build it and also the party around you too. To wrap things up, I do plan on making character builds and narrative-driven campaign showcases of Dragon's Dogma similar to my character builds from Baldur's Gate 3 and also narrative-driven campaigns from Warhammer 3. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you to my returning viewers for checking this out. I know it is much different from the videos that most of you are seeing me upload. If you're a new viewer and are a huge fan of D&D, Elder Scrolls, and Warhammer Fantasy, I'd love to have you join us on those adventures, friends. So remember to hit the like, subscribe, and bell icon notifications, and I'll save you a seat at the table for those next adventures.